Hello, lovely people. A lot of you have asked me for my take on the new Paramount limited series that just came out called Cybersleuths, and I think most people wanted my take on it because on this channel I'm very critical of tragedy pimps, meaning content creators who really exploit true crime cases for dollars. Bullhorn Betty, one of the most prolific tragedy pimps on YouTube, had her moment in the spotlight in this series, but I don't think it really turned out how she thought it would. But as someone who spent their entire career working with mainstream media on exactly this type of content, I'm going to talk about the folly of believing that being in a docuseries is always a good thing. But first, here are my impressions of the series itself. For people who are only loosely interested in true crime and aren't glued to true crime content on a daily basis, I think it was a pretty good introduction to the idea that not all true crime content makers are trustworthy or legit or giving you valid information on a case. On the other hand, if you're someone like me who spends probably 90% of my content watching hours on true crime and sees the antics of these types of tragedy pimps,
what did you do with your daughter? Fire him from the job!
It's rather unsatisfying as a series. For someone like me who sees that the entire problem of cyber sleuthing and tragedy pimping is actually fueled by how the platforms reward the worst behavior, it was actually very, very frustrating. And it continues to be frustrating that whenever mainstream media talks about sleuths and tragedy pimps, they leave out the most important factor. It's like talking about how all kinds of people are dying in a town without revealing that the town's water source has been poisoned by the town itself. Something like that. So in my view, the mainstream media is taking baby steps by showing the mainstream audience the juxtaposition of real journalists like Kathleen Hale and the CBS correspondent versus tragedy pimps like Bullhorn Betty. But it's dissatisfying for people who watch them every day and see how the tragedy pimps absolutely mangle the facts of cases and harass true crime victims and sometimes harass other true crime YouTubers or just YouTubers who call them out for it.
You are the worst of the worst, Krusty Cracker. The absolute worst of the worst. And you know what? You're a miserable bitch. You do not want to fuck with me, little girl.
Paramount didn't take them to task for any of that. And I felt that the Paramount series was just really a visual illustration of the really good Vanity Fair article that Kathleen Hale wrote just a year ago, which also happened to feature Bullhorn Betty. But even Kathleen Hale was more harsh about the harassment than Paramount was. And even though I did appreciate the Vanity Fair article, that article didn't get into how this is all made possible. Strike that. Not just made possible, but encouraged by the platforms. I'll give you two very simple examples of opportunities they teed up and then totally missed. At one point, the series talked about how Cybersleuths will glom on to a case that has financial rewards, but it doesn't talk about what drives those financial rewards. The primary driver of those financial rewards is attention.
If I want attention, I'll get attention. If I want something to, trust me, this is the one thing I got down pat. If I want attention, I'll get it. I'm not a clout chaser. I'm a clout creator.
Being as outrageous as possible.
And I'm so far above you, bitch, it's not even funny.
As long as you can get attention, you will get rewarded. The platform will deliver subscribers and views to you, even if what you're saying is completely false and conspiratorial. Even if what you're saying has the possibility of causing harm to many people, including the very victims that they're covering in the case. Even if a totally ridiculous conspiracy, such as the idea that the cartels were behind selling drugs out of the murder house, and that there were cartel tunnels going in and out of the murder house, if that ridiculous content is getting attention, it gets promoted by the platforms, and that's wrong. But that piece of it is not touched on by Paramount or any mainstream media outlet that I've seen cover the idea of cyber sleuthing. In another similar segment, Paramount talked about how cyber sleuths will create conspiracy theories like the one I just mentioned about cartels. It would have been dead simple for Paramount to point out just in the next sentence that conspiracy content on the internet are these platforms' bread and butter. The tragedy pimps know this and they exploit it. Real journalists can't go this far because if they make things up out of whole cloth without some kind of factual basis or sourcing, the company they work for could lose their broadcasting license. One journalist acting like an idiot could cause all of their other colleagues at that company to lose their jobs. So there are lawyers watching over the content they put out like a hawk. The only thing standing between a tragedy pimp on YouTube or other content platform putting out legitimate information and complete lies and conspiracies are their own values and their own moral compasses. As paid content providers on these social media platforms, we're supposed to agree to terms of service and community guidelines, but it becomes clear pretty quickly that the platforms, especially YouTube, are very sometimey about their enforcement of those rules. So it's pretty easy to get away with violating the rules and still getting that higher paycheck than the creator who actually has a moral compass. By the way, shout out to Jen Liu from the Ward Case Studies for saying that YouTube is sometimey in a chat the other day. I just can't take credit for that. So I think you get the point. This series serves a purpose, but for me, it's just one more in a long line of examples of mainstream media reports on cyber sleuths and tragedy pimps that does not address the core issue. And if we never address the core issue, this will just keep going round and round and round and round. And yes, it is fun to watch someone like Bullhorn Betty kind of get real braggadocious before the series comes out and say, I'm going to be on this series, I'm going to be on this series, and then know that she wasn't really portrayed very well in the series. And anyone who has been working with the media as long as I do knows it is naive to think that you have any control over the outcome of what you end up looking like in a media docuseries. And no, you do not get paid to be in these docuseries unless you bring value to them, unless you have some sort of outsized value to them. If your participation in that docuseries can bring more eyeballs to them, you may be able to get paid. None of these people were going to bring eyeballs to Paramount. Paramount is bringing eyeballs to them. So that's how the system works. I'll end this by addressing one last disappointment for hardcore true crime watchers who want tragedy pimps to get their proper comeuppance through mainstream media exposure. Unfortunately, even the worst media stories about people will elevate their profiles on the internet, not because people like them, but because they were successful at getting attention by being in that media report.
If I want attention, I'll get attention.
So for instance, if you really dislike Bullhorn Betty or Jonathan Lee Riches and expected them to see a decrease in subscribers or views or sentiment because of how they were portrayed in the series, you'll be disappointed because the platforms will push more eyeballs their way by virtue of the fact that they were in a mainstream docuseries. And I'm sorry to say this, but until platforms like YouTube change their entire system, their entire reward system, where the worst behavior is rewarded.
Because they took my channel, and here I am building another one. Literally from the ground up. I already have 60 days, 4,000 subscribers, and it keeps going up, no matter how much they keep throwing at me. They're losers. They're failures at everything.
And where unscrupulous people can get away with doing horrible things to get attention.
And I'm so far above you, bitch, it's not even funny.
The only thing we can do is wait for people like them to self-destruct. We see evidence of YouTube self-destruction all the time. Just the other day, I posted about how a channel called Seeking the Truth with Dave finally lost its channel after years and years of tragedy pimping off of the murder of Shanann Watts in many cruel ways. These behaviors do eventually catch up to them, but usually not before a lot of people are hurt, unfortunately. Really, the loudest thing you can do to protest these types of channels seems really weak, but in big numbers is strong. Just don't click. Pass up that tragedy pimping link for the channels that you know are doing their best to present factual information and doesn't exploit true crime victims and their families.
Do you want me to leave YouTube? It ain't happening, bitch.
Thank you for watching, and peace out.